Welcome to this afternoon session of Chu and Chat. For your lunch, I hope you have yours. I don't have mine because I forgot to go out and get it. So we created these sessions so that we can talk to different people in the City Council and about what's going on in the city at the moment. Experts in the city as well as the City Council. It hasn't escaped our attention that with COVID, with how times are so challenging with how the office normally does outreach, we haven't been able to go to the communities, we haven't been able to talk to people and engage with people in the community. So this is a way that I was hoping that we can connect better, especially in terms of what the city's been doing, because Dublin City Council has done a lot of work when it comes to the pandemic. They've been holding very well in terms of the front line with the community call service that has been on, that actually Brendan himself, I'll be chatting to him about that as well, about how it has formed different groups together to try to get the city managing the crisis in the city. So just a bit of housekeeping in terms of this session. It will be recorded, but no names will be appearing on the attendees list in the record. And also, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. We will try to answer as many questions as possible that comes into us. When you put it on the Q&A box, it comes directly into us, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. If we do not get to your questions, please email us and we will make sure your question gets answered. So it is lordmayor@dublincity.ie. That's lordmayor@dublincity.ie. So before I kick off with Brendan, just want to thank the team that Rosemary and Rowan for getting us online today, and the session's ready. So without any further ado, I'm going to be chatting today with Assistant Chief Executive Brendan Kenny. Brendan, welcome.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
So with these sessions, we like to delve a little bit about kind of the person's background. How did they get here? How did they get into the current role? And then talk about the role itself, and talk about what are the issues, and also then some of the solutions and the current projects. And then we ask the panelists some questions. So if you want to kick off by telling us, well, how did you get where you currently are?
Well, Lord Mayor, I'm working in Dublin City Council for over 40 years now, and most of it I'd spent in the housing area, and in more recent years it's housing, homelessness, traveller accommodation, and a few other things as well. So I'm a long time here. I'm not from Dublin. I'm in Dublin a long time. I'm from County Mayo, so I would support the Dublin GA team every time, except when Mayo are playing against them. I have to support Mayo those days. Otherwise, I support them all the way.
Well, that's good to hear of your allegiances. So now, housing department in Dublin City Council. How long have you been there? Because I know one of the houses, one of the apartments that we were giving back to one of the residents of Teresa Gardens the other week when I went down there, you were saying that she was one of the people you worked with 18 years ago. So that's a long time. Has it been the same time in the council all these years in the same area?
I started work in Dublin City Council in December of 1979 when the housing department was over in Jervis Street. But a lot of these regeneration projects do take a lot of time, and I spent a lot of time out in Teresa's Gardens, and it was very enjoyable, but it was very challenging. And the lady we met on the morning, it was really good to see her because she was one of the stalwarts there all during that time. And it's great satisfaction for me after all the hard work to see people like her getting a well-deserved new home. And we'll continue now. We're going to knock down the last few blocks in Teresa's Gardens, because Teresa's Gardens has been a problem for a long time. Not down to the people, but there have been issues there. So we really look forward to that. But it's really, really pleasing for people like me and my colleagues when we see work coming to fruition like that.
Yeah, and it was lovely to see her face. In fairness, I think it was just see the joy, but also see the sadness, because she was able to say this has been a long time, and that it was hard fought as well in many cases. So I guess that leads us into my question, not question, but talking to you about the area of, well, how how is housing at the moment in the city? Because there's a lot of talk about housing, and you and I sit with other councillors on the homeless task force that was set up through this office, but we also sit on Housing SPC together. So tell, for our audience here at the moment, who a lot of them probably know about how housing works in Dublin City, but some of them don't, how would you address, like, I guess, bring them through the housing problems at the moment in Dublin City, or what is being done at the moment, and what your remit is over?
Well, housing obviously is the biggest challenge that the city has, and that's been the case for the last few years. When the recession came back in 2008, 2009, no housing at all was built of any type for a good few years. So we're still suffering from that. Like 3 years ago, we had a waiting list of 20,000 households on our waiting list. Now, thankfully, that's down to 14,500. Now, it's still too much. We've made good progress on homelessness. We have the numbers in hotels, number of families in hotels, are emergency accommodations in relation to families, so that's the lowest level since 2014. So, like, there's still a crisis, but we've made good progress, particularly in the last few years. And it's all about getting supply. And I suppose we do spend a lot of time talking about housing and all that, but what we really need to do is build houses. We need to get more and more. And in going forward, we certainly need housing for single people, because in the last 2 years, the number of single people presenting into homelessness in Dublin has increased by about 1,000. And we actually moved about 1,000 single people out of emergency accommodation last year. So that's a combination of about 2,000 single people in and out of the system in a period of 2 years. And that's a difficult one for us. So at the moment, there's over 3,000 single people in emergency accommodation in the city. That's far too high. There'll always be a need for some emergency accommodation, but certainly that's way too high. So while the housing supply is a big issue, we've made progress on all sides, but still a long way to go. And COVID has done a lot of damage to us. COVID has held up a lot of our projects, a lot of our good projects that would have been finished in 2021 will not now be finished until 2022. So certainly that doesn't help. But supply and more housing. And we understand that we do get a lot of opposition when we do plan to build housing anywhere in the city. And we can understand people have concerns about higher rise and higher density and all that. But if we want to get housing in the city, we have to build, and we have to build quickly, and we have to build a lot of it.
Well, the thought of quickly at the moment, as you said, and this is a question that has come through, so I might ask some of the questions that come through during our conversations as well. One of the things we've noticed, and certainly as a councillor and other councillors has raised, and I know our chair of SPC, Housing SPC, Alison Gilliland, had raised before, is like the public procurement and approval process takes a long time. So there's delays in our development lands. And while we must abide by EU procurement laws, why has DCC not requested more autonomy in these? Because I know our own QSs have even had issues with it. So what would like your stance be on how do we address that issue?
It's a difficult one, Lord Mayor, because we have to comply with EU regulations, and we have to comply with national regulations on public procurement, and rightly so. And I don't see any change coming there. Actually, I see things maybe getting even more bureaucratic and harder as the times ahead. I think the important thing for us is to make sure that there are no delays on our side. Like, there's always timescales in relation to public procurement, and that's fine, we'll go through those. But it's very, very important that we cut out any delays on our side. And there's different types of procurement. We have to go public procurement to get design teams, to get consultants, and then finally you have to go through a public procurement process to get a contractor. Now, we have improved that ourselves by development of frameworks, so it means when a project comes up, we don't have to go out to public procurement each time. We can develop a framework, which is a panel of contractors, and they're held on that framework for 5 years. So it's only a mini competition that we have to do. So certainly that has speeded that up. But it's not just public procurement, Lord Mayor, that holds up the process. All kinds of other things. There's the consultation, there's the resistance, there's the opposition, there's the various studies, the feasibility studies, the approvals, and sometimes there's a delay in actually trying to get to a decision made. You know, sometimes if there's a mixed development, you know, what percentage should be social, what percentage should be affordable, all that kind of can take time. So I wouldn't put total blame on the public procurement, but if you had the whole lot up, yeah, it is a cumbersome and slow process.
But isn't that then, Brendan, just a matter of a lot of red tape? Like, can you, like, I guess as someone who's who's kind of been in this position for a long time, do you think there's more red tape now than there was before, or do you think it's always been like this? And if it's the case that there is just a lot of barriers and red tape, how do we as a local authority make sure that we push for change at the national or departmental level? Or is there to be change to be pushed, do you think? Because you're one of those people that is rare, is that you've been in this position for so long and been through every layer and seen it through different lenses on how we can do this better. So like, do you think there's been more in terms of bureaucracy now than before? And if so, then how do we change it on a national or departmental level?
I wouldn't call it red tape, because red tape kind of gives out the impression that it's something that can be avoided. Sometimes bureaucracy is used. Certainly the whole process is far more complicated, absolutely, and far more cumbersome than what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. Like 30, 40 years ago, there was no mention of health and safety. That's a big issue these days. Public procurement wasn't really a big issue when we were building the large-scale housing out in Carver Valley Farmers about 50, 60 years ago. But the process has gotten more cumbersome, and a lot of it has come about for the right reasons, because this country doesn't have a great track record in relation to construction. So rules had to be changed, more regulations had to be put in, and every time you put in more regulations and more rules, it adds to that delay. So it is a difficult one, but I don't regard it as red tape or bureaucracy. I think the important thing is, and sometimes organisations like ourselves, we don't respond fast enough when the rules are changed, and when the rules have become more complicated, we don't change with it. So, I think we just need to be, like in relation to public procurement, it's really an expertise that's needed, and we either buy it in, or else we set up public procurement departments and sections, which we have ourselves. But sometimes we're slow to adapt to new rules that are coming in.
But this is the thing. I look at like other EU countries, like you look at certain countries and you kind of go, oh my God, there's no procurement process here, especially in more Southeast Asia countries. But if you look at European countries, they seem to be able to do things a lot more quickly. Is it our lack of agility due to the fact that we're kind of caught up in how procurement runs and our hands are bound, or is it the fact that we are just a bit too slow to adapt?
I think we're a bit slow to adapt, but we probably do take a more rigid approach to public procurement in Ireland than we do, for example, what they do in the UK. And the UK are obviously outside the EU now, but it's not always about the procurement, Lord Mayor. Like projects can get like we spent 4 years, working on the Traynor project. Went through the whole procurement process and all that, and then that gets rejected. Those kind of things can hold things up as well. I don't think there's much point in us putting a huge amount of effort into trying to change it and get rid of public procurement. It's not going to happen. It's more about adapting ourselves and maybe looking at more innovative ways of actually procuring. Like we're procuring housing generally in the same way as we did 30, 35 years ago, for instance, much easier. So, should we be looking at more? And I know it doesn't go down well, but I mentioned that, PPP type projects or joint ventures, where the procurement can actually be, kind of done. Seems to be done much faster. Where we're using the same traditional process that we did 30, 35 years ago. And I don't think it's going to get any easier. I think the restrictions will be getting more difficult, and we need to get ready and adapt to that.
I certainly understand standards and regulations being put in place, and they need to be put in place because, as you say, we can't be cowboys. But at the same time, it seems like it's effectively preventing us from rolling out at pace, and that's a difficulty. For me, you mentioned Oscar Traynor here, which segues me nicely into it. Of you did an interview this morning with Pat Kenny, and on the interview they was talking about Oscar Traynor and was talking about the proposal. So for folks who doesn't know, there is the site to be developed in Oscar Traynor Road, and last week there was just this Monday gone, the group that was chaired by Alison, there was a group that myself, Alison, and other councillors are on, a working group to talk about how the tenure mix of the site should be. And we now move on then from agreeing to the tenure mix. That it was a site that was voted down within the council because we didn't think that there was the right mix and right development, or actually some parts of the development were good, but that the right mix wasn't in there. So now we're trying to push and work with Brendan's team and work with the minister to try to look at a model where there's a higher in terms of amount of social housing, there's a higher cost rental and higher affordable homes. Brendan, tell me what your interview and now, like with what you talked about and the overall subject, like you and I have had this chat, it's about how we move forward now on the project.
Yes, Lord Mayor, and like we were disappointed. Yeah, we were disappointed that the plan that so much work had gone into was rejected. We think it was the wrong decision. But that's not our call. That's the call of the democratic process of the city councillors. The bones of a new plan has been put together. We welcome that. We welcome agreement on the mix, and we just have to get on with that and develop that plan. The only point that I was making, and I constantly admit it is back to the drawing board. It is a new plan, and yes, we can do that. It's a big one. It's going to cost about €400 million. It has implications for us and all that. But yeah, let's get on with it. We just have to get on with it. But it was a big disappointment that a plan that probably could have been on site at the end of this year or early 2022 was rejected. But if we have to develop the land, and we'll get on with it.
And I get your disappointment, but I guess you and I are like we probably disagree. Like there are things that myself and Brendan would agree a lot on, and then there are things we disagree on, and we know that and we respect that of each other. I think myself and a few councillors, our point was that there needed to be we constantly talk about the need to build social and public housing on public land. And I think for us with Oscar Traynor, there was this moment where we have a minister that could be willing, because previously when we looked at different projects, we saw that there was an unwillingness from government to fund it. So we're hoping this minister will be willing. And I do think the length of time, I'm hoping it will be shorter, and I'm hoping it won't be the amount that you're saying, but then we don't know. So when no one is trying to delay housing, however, there is a move to try to get more in terms of social housing and more in terms of affordable and cost rental. So I'm glad that it's a case that we all will be working together on the table moving forward for this, Brendan. So it is, because I know the councillors have put a lot of work in, and I know your team have put a lot of work in. So it's a case of drawing up the right plans and bringing it to the minister and seeing how we go next. And I'm hoping he'll be on board. So I like housing is one area that you have a huge brief. So because housing is one area, but then the knock-on direct effect of what we're seeing in the city of homelessness, of when we don't have enough housing and therefore people are homeless, that remit is yours as well. You have a very big, as I said, brief there. So I guess run our audience through that at the moment. What have you seen in the last 10 years, 15, 20 years of how things have gone in terms of homelessness, and what are these work that's been put in place?
Yes, Hazel, I remember working on the homeless situation back in 2005, 2006. And at that stage, it was the Dublin Homeless Agency was set up. And we had a clear objective at that stage. And that objective was to eliminate homelessness by 2010. But suddenly that didn't work. And the homeless situation is an awful lot worse. And it's very, very sad. It's awful, appalling to see the fallout from that. And it's really is a very difficult one. And at the end of the day, when you, like in a country as small as Ireland or a city as small as Dublin, if you stop building for a period of years, you're going to find it very hard to catch up. And there's different types of issues in society. Not a single people becoming homeless. There's a drugs issue in Dublin, and that has its own fallout, mental health issues. And then there's migrants coming into the country as well, which is a good thing, but that's all adding to the issue. So the situation got to in March of, say, 2017, I remember well, when there was 871 families in hotels. That's the peak. Now we're down to about 500 or less, and it's the lowest figure since 2014. So that's a big progress in a fairly short period of time. And it wasn't just COVID that helped that. It was, the situation was beginning to stabilise. But as I said earlier, the situation in relation to singles is poor, and we have not a lot of work to do there. Now, overall, we do have beds for everybody. Anybody that needs a bed can get one. I get a text every morning at 7 o'clock to tell me how many beds were available. For 2 years, I was getting texts every morning to say there was no beds available and that there were up to 70 people trying to wait night before. Now there's a bed for everybody that actually wants it. There are genuinely then people who can't take up those beds. But we're now in a situation where we're looking at more strategically that some of the properties that we have leased or acquired over the last few years for emergency accommodation, that we can start thinking about converting them into permanent apartments. So rather than having them as emergency accommodation, that we can turn them into one bed or studio apartments for single people. And I think it's the first time that we were kind of in a situation where we started even thinking about that. So if things stay the way they are and we continue to keep some hold of it, I'd like to think that a lot of the emergency accommodation that we've acquired in the last 3 to 4 or 5 years, that we'll be able to convert them into one bedroom or studio apartments for single people.
Well, this is the thing. Like I know we see the stats that things have improved, especially during COVID and then last year. But it's still a crisis. It's still an issue. It's still a massive issue we have in our city, and we see it in terms of people having to live in tents, people not being people not having to not being able to find accommodation. But then you and I and the other councillors drilled into this on the homeless task force a bit, insofar that we spoke to some users, and there is the side of where we don't see, especially in the recent tent clearance on the canal, that those people that the people were worked with and found accommodation. Can you tell us a bit, because there was a huge issue of that I saw it go viral on social media of tents being cleared and people's tents kind of taken away. So what happened there, as in how has that been kind of working in terms of outreach, because there is outreach at the moment in those areas?
Yeah, it's tragic to see people, sleeping in tents or sleeping in doorways and sleeping bags. And on the one hand, we can say there's enough beds for them, but I know it's not as simple as that. There are people with particular issues and particular problems that are not able to take up those beds. But for people living in tents, like, it is a serious public health issue for the people themselves. It's dangerous to be sleeping out in a tent. They get attacked. There are public issues around hygiene and all this, and it's for people who are traversing those areas, it's a risk as well. And no matter how people say, well, the hostels are not great, but the reality is they're a safe, warm bed. There's food, there's support, and all that. It has to be better than actually sleeping in a tent. So the effort we put into it, or the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive put into it, it's not about clearing the tents. It's about working with the people in the tents, working with them and trying to encourage them, and they have to work at it all the time and trying to get them into emergency accommodation where they have some chance of getting the support that they require. And that's the work that the DRG has been doing and the outreach service has been doing, and they're doing great work on that. And they're going to continue to do that. But this idea sometimes of throwing out to the DHE or Dublin City Council, well, just move with the tents. The tents are moved when they're emptied. They're not moved while people are there. And it is really hard work to try and coax them out of that, which is an unsafe place for them to be, and into emergency accommodation. We're working closer with HSE because some of the people involved would have serious drug issues, and we will be enhancing this, the work, Hazel, that you did with the task force, to enhance the outreach service so that drug addiction workers and other type of workers coming out trying to encourage people to take the accommodation that's there now. 2 years ago, it wasn't there. And it is a difficult one, but certainly, people living in tents, it's not safe for them to do that. We can accept sometimes why they do that, but our emphasis all the time is to work with them
Well, you mentioned the HSE there because we identified, like when we identified one of the things on the task force was the outreach issues, because you mentioned that sometimes outreach teams goes out, and if individual have a drug issue or mental health issue, there's not that experience there. But one of the things, and I want to call him out on this call because he has done such stellar work, is that I remember, I think it was yourself or someone else telling me that when Dr. Austin and Carol went out on outreach session, he was able to talk to people in such a way that made them feel comfortable about taking up a bed spot. And he has been one of those people during COVID that has been so helpful in the work he's done. And it's formed a better relationship with the RHE, and so insofar there's a better working relationship now with the HSE. Is that right? So.
That's right. We work very well with HSE and we know them very well. And senior officials and Dr. Austin Carroll did go out. And the reason I went out was to see exactly what the situation was and to come back with a plan. So through the work of your task force, Hazel, we expect a plan from HSE shortly as to how they will enhance the outreach services out to the people that need it. And that would be kind of, people with drug addiction expertise and mental health services. We have to get those services out actually to the tents and to the people on the streets. I think maybe in the past we felt that, well, we have to get them into hostels, but that hasn't really worked for us. There are some people that just simply won't go in. So we're very, very happy with the support and the cooperation we've been getting from the HSE. And that was something the way it was through the whole COVID. There was a really huge amount of work during COVID-19 early on to move vulnerable people out of hostels. And I have no doubt a lot more people would have died from COVID in homeless services, only for the work that was done to ourselves in the HSE. And we aim to continue that. Having two organisations like the DLHE and the HSE on the same wavelength, doing the same thing, that's far more powerful than one.
Yeah, it is, because I think there's also a need for, we called this out as well, that one of the recommendations of our report was that there needs to be wraparound services, that it's not a one size fits all when it comes to homelessness, that there's different types of homelessness and there's different issues to address. And I like to, again, also come back to you mentioned mental health and drugs. I want people to eradicate that stigma that people think, people who are homeless are automatically, there's a mental health issue or drug issue. A lot of times it's a vicious circle. They're homeless and they develop that, and it's more because it's driven by circumstance more than anything else, but we don't have their services. And it's good to hear that there's a plan by the HSE to develop the services to provide better wraparound care, because that's what we need. But there is a pointer by one of the audience, is that sometimes people just don't feel safe in hostels. We have heard stories, Brendan, where people get attacked in hostels or they get robbed in hostels. Sure, we saw it in the report, reports on RT there of the interviewee saying, listen, she just didn't feel safe. How are we addressing the hostel standards to make sure they're fit for purpose, especially in light of what has come about on fire certs as well? What is the team doing to make sure that we address these issues and to make sure that we have a standard and make hostels feel safe for people while we try to find better accommodation as well?
Yeah, we realise, and we've been told that people who are sleeping rough had bad experience in hostels. But quite often it's not to do with the standards, it's to do with the behaviour of other people in the hostels. And we're conscious that, a lot of the people living in hostels are traumatised, they're very vulnerable. But at the same time, and we're satisfied, we're monitoring the standards, and we're bringing in an outside external company shortly to do professional inspections to report back. We have a strong property team. They're out, evening times. I don't have to hear any complaint to go out there. But again, we would argue, and maybe it's too simplistic, that people are far more at risk in a tent than they are in a hostel. It's really dangerous for people to be in a tent. People can get attacked. Some of the tents are beside the canal and so on. It is very risky. It's unhygienic and all that. But at the same time, we can understand that there are some people that just simply can't cope in hostels. One of the good things we have nowadays, we have choice for people. 2 years ago, it was either you take this hostel or nothing else. Because we have beds to spare right throughout the system at the moment, we can offer choices to people. So if a person had a bad experience in one house on the south side of the city, now we have the scope to put them into a house on the north side of the city. It is a very tricky one. We know it's not simple, but we're doing our level best with the standards in the hostels. The DGO do really good service. We have some private operators. They're providing good service as far as we're concerned. If there's any complaint, we deal with very, very quickly, but we will have a very professional inspection regime in all hostels, in all emergency accommodation in the city before the summer is out. That doesn't mean we weren't doing those inspections. But again, I simply have to say that it's still, in our view, safer for somebody to be in a hostel that's warm, where they get the food, they get support, and there's always a management structure there, than actually sleeping in a tent.
Okay, but the standard, there will be that there'll be someone brought in to evaluate the standards of all of the hostels currently.
Well, it'll be an external company that we're going through a procurement. Again, it's a procurement. It's going to take us months to do it, to get an external company or external organisation that's going to be commissioned by the DHE to be our inspectorate, and they will do a whole schedule of inspections. Inspection report will report back, and the DHE will have to respond to everything there. We were doing that ourselves, but I think there was a lack of confidence that was strong enough, so we're going to get an independent organisation to do that, and I would hope to have that in place before the end of the summer.
Okay, so a matter of months. The other thing we looked at, I know you and me and others identified, and I know you had mentioned there being places, day services, because there had been a day services report that you, and for our folks in the audience of what is day services, it's providing people who are homeless to have access to something else during the day while they're waiting for the bed at night. So where are we at, or what are we looking at in terms of the RHE and day services?
We're very much in favour of enhancing the day services, Hazel. Like in the last 5-6 years, we put all our emphasis on accommodation at night time. That's where our emphasis went. And not enough emphasis went on what happens during the day. So quite often you might get a homeless man who's walking the streets during the day on the boardwalk. Then we get complaints of their behaviour, and this is what these people are often mentioned to us. And they can get into trouble, during the day, not having anywhere to go to. Now, we did change the system in the hostels where people don't have to go out during the day, but people like to go out during the day. So we did a very comprehensive report or review of day service, day and evening services there a few months ago. And we're making really good progress on that. And the support that you give to us, Hazel, as chair of the task force, certainly helped that. And we've made good progress insofar. I would hope that we'll be announcing in a few weeks' time a number of pilot projects in the city centre that where people can go to during the day, and where can we assist. Like when before COVID, when I went out to the Parquet Street where the homeless services are, you see queues around the corner, people waiting and all that. So if we had more kind of satellites that would kind of act as day service around, they could do an element of the service. If somebody's up from the country and they don't have their papers or anything else, they could do work there, and then we can link in. But we would hope to have progress very soon on that phase, and we're getting good support from the department and from the minister on it. But I would hope that we'll be able to announce two initiatives on that in the coming weeks.
Great, that would be amazing, because I know from the homeless task force that was set up here is that we had 2 service users, and one of them had a really heartbreaking, I won't name his name for privacy reasons, but it was just heartbreaking to hear his story, Brendan, on how he was wandering the streets during the day and didn't know what to do, and it was just, and depression kicked in, and it was just, it will be great if that is up and coming to roll out soon. There was a couple of comments in terms of hostels and security. One of the questions is it difficult balancing privacy and security in homeless hostels?
Of course it is, Hazel, yes. Now, some of the situations have improved because we had to thin out, we had to reduce the capacity in most of our hostels in the city as a result of COVID to get social distancing. So in some ways, there is more space there. But yes, in hostels, particularly in some of them, yes, it's very difficult to get that, yes.
Yeah, and I have a frustrated audience member here saying that myself and yourself are not taking responsibility and accountability. I just we're responsible for it. All of us are. So all of us within working in the area are, and this is why there are plans of what to do. Day services was something highlighted, and day services is something that needs that will be addressed. Safety and standards on hostels was something again that was brought up, and it's why we've asked for procurement for inspection to be addressed. Now there are more. There will always be more, and these are just. We need housing to end homelessness, but we also need the various myriads of things that will help. So I think wraparound services was identified, talking to Tony Duffin, making sure that we had caseworkers and case management, especially when it comes to addiction, and the drug side was identified. So I get the frustration, but I would 100% say that, yeah, we are accountable for this. And this is why we want to hear your comments, and we want to hear your questions on it, and we will and try to fix things as we go along. So Brendan, I guess this moves on to, and this is the thing with homelessness. I want to make sure that people understand that I will be tweeting out kind of the list of numbers that people can contact when they see anyone sleeping rough, or they need outreaches and certain for certain people, because part of it is also working together to try to make sure we find people who we see sleeping rough accommodation and shelter. So. But what is it, I guess, Brendan, from your point of view, especially in terms of homelessness, what is it that your office is doing straight away to make sure that we are fit for purpose moving out of COVID? Because we're hoping to move out of COVID. And during COVID, there's been work that has happened quicker. But when we're coming out of COVID, where do you see the overall landscape? And how do we make sure we also prevent homeless deaths? Because that is something that has been happening, and that is something that we need to address properly as well.
Yes, one of the things that the DRG has got experience at over the last few years is emergency situations. And that's one of the reasons why it was so ready for COVID when it did come, and they were able to respond really well. And the staff down there are fabulous, and the way they work with the HSE, and they took risks themselves, because they can get COVID as well. But to be ready after COVID, it means that some of the vulnerable people that we cocooned into more suitable accommodation, they may have to come back. We're working hard with them to see, can we house those people under Housing First? Can we ensure that they don't go back to where they were before? That's being worked on. But the big issue here is, you're right, is the accommodation. Like, the homeless situation is not solved in any way. It's appalling. Like, we shouldn't have the type of homeless situation we have. But there's a lot of people working very, very, very hard at it. We do also, and it's no harm for me to say that every time we try and promote accommodation for homeless people in most parts of the city, we get huge opposition. Everybody wants to see the problem solved, but there's something they don't want to see it solved in that area. But the key to it is more and more accommodation. And like 1,000 single people moved out of emergency accommodation in 2020. That's the highest for a long time. So we need to get more. We need to get more smaller apartments built in the city. As I said, we need to convert emergency accommodation. When we're ready, we can only do this. The reality is, the job over the last 5 years was just to get emergency accommodation, get people off the streets, get families into hotels, and then once they're with the hotels, we get them out to family hubs. So it's really kind of a fire brigade operation. But now that things have progressed, we're now in a situation that we can actually get more strategic and start getting more and more accommodation out there. And that's the solution at the end of the day. But the problem isn't solved in any way. We have a long way to go. It's appalling that we have it. But I do see some good signs. So the fact that we have, for the last 5 or 6 months, we've had 50, 60, sometimes up to 100 beds to spare every night. I never saw that before. My whole time for the last 15 years, I never saw that. So it just shows an emergency accommodation isn't ideal, but if people have nowhere to go or have to sleep on the street, well, then we have to find emergency accommodation. But it's a case of changing that over. We need to change the planning rules. At the moment, under the city development plan, the planners, and rightly so, they look for a mix of housing units in every development. And I wouldn't be too keen on having all small apartments. Most of the housing need over years was for large families, so most of the accommodation that we have in the city is 3-bedroom houses and 3-bedroom apartments. And we have a whole lot of other people in need. So the reality is it's very difficult to cater for single people. We have to be careful as well that the family situation, which has improved a lot, and there's still 500 families on it, it's still far too much, that it doesn't go back. Like when COVID is over and the restrictions on evictions and all that come back, is there a risk? There may well be a risk that more and more people in the family get home. So we're planning for that, and all our objectives is try and ensure that that doesn't return to where it was, and it's still not right.
I guess you and I have addressed it privately, but I guess on here it'd be good to say that we know that at least from the reports there are beds available, up to 100 beds that you say every night, but we also see people sleeping on the streets. And you said this at the very beginning, that there is a disconnect insofar there are people not going in for various reasons. That gap we do have to bridge though, Brendan, because I think there are ways around it. There is a case of that you said that we'll be working with the HSE and there'll be a plan. So it'd be great to see that plan come sooner than later, because it would be a case that those that are still on the street that needs help, that can get into a bed, that we try to provide them with that bed, because it may well be the case we have it on a record to say, oh, there's 100 beds, but then we can see in the city that there's people on the street. So we need to fix that gap. So, and I don't mean, it's not calling people gaps. It's very much a disconnect of what just because we have beds doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. And it seems like we've identified the problem. So we need to make sure we address it.
I fully agree with you, Hazel. Like me saying that there's enough beds to go around, I know fully well that it's not as simple as that. However, that is a position that we didn't have 2 years ago. So we have some chance. I always felt sorry for our outreach workers going out on the streets, say 2 years ago, because even if there was a poor man on the street and stayed back and said, here, I love a bed, we didn't have them. There was no beds to give to them. At least now there are some beds. But that breach, I think, and it's not insurmountable, Hazel, and over the last few years, a lot of entrenched rough sleepers, people who are sleeping rough for a long time, and now in accommodation, they've been housed through housing first and are working out very, very, very well. So it can be done. And I'd be very confident now that we get this plan together with the HSE that we'll be able to do more of that. I think there'll always be a small amount of people, but there's far too many out there. We have to fill that gap. But the only point I'm making is that we now have beds to spare, and we certainly didn't have them 2 years ago. So we're in an improved situation. I'd like to keep going so that we can actually convert some of those emergency beds into apartments. And people might say, well, why don't you do that now? Like if we decide to take...
There's actually a question here asking, why don't we build homeless apartments now? So
yeah, well, I think if we decide, say, to change a hostel to apartments, well, the first thing we have to do is empty it. So if we take 60 people out, where they're going to go? So that's why we need that excess accommodation there, so that we can gradually do that over the next few years. And some of the houses and the hostels that we have at the moment for emergency accommodation could, I don't know what it costs money, but they could be fairly easily converted into permanent tenancies. And if we can get to that stage, I think we're making really good progress.
Okay. And you mentioned the city development plan. The consultation is closed on that. We're going to go through the next phase for folks who have submitted consultation, but we look at kind of the strategy of the overall city, Brendan. And in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of hotels, there's been a lot of student accommodation granted. They're now empty. Like, there's a question here in terms of, is there a plan to use those spaces, use the apartments or student accommodations for dealing with the homeless and housing situation that we have?
Well, there isn't, to be honest, there isn't a plan there at the moment, Hazel, and you can, if you walk around the city, you can see some fabulous new student accommodation lying empty. And, a couple of 100 yards away, we might be using a building that's not super, not as good as it should be for emergency accommodation. So why not move the people from there into the student accommodation?
Yes.
I think there's a planning restriction there. I think that's an argument, councils, I think, could have some city council meeting. We've already had a small number of owners of these developments around the city who've asked us, would we be interested? And of course, we'll be interested, but there's a big planning issue there, and I think there will be a lot of opposition, I think, to resistance to that. But that is a real opportunity that's there in the city now, and it's not being taken up.
And I think that this is the thing. I loathe to say opportunity out of COVID, but there are opportunities, especially when it comes to how we better relationships. We're working with HSE and moving forward for wraparound services, but we also need to seize the moment of there are empty student accommodation that we can snap up as well. Talking of empty, there's a question there about vacant sites. What are we doing in terms of that, and why? So we see a kind of myriad of vacant sites around. What is the plan for them?
Yes, it is very frustrating for everybody, including the public, to walk around town and see many vacant, and it's almost vacant properties people are talking about, are vacant properties over shops. It's a very difficult one. They're in private ownership. They're all owned by the private sector, and sometimes private owners. So like, we can't force our hand on it. We can, and we have a very good land management unit. Helen McNamara, our development department, runs that, and there's a lot of progress we've made on getting those sites back and getting those properties back. But if the owner doesn't cooperate or doesn't want to cooperate, we have to go through what we call the compulsory purchase order system, the CPO, and that can take years to do that. So sometimes people think that we can just go out and take a property. There's incentives out there. We have to repair and lease, where people can get a grant to repair their property. There's the buy and renew system, where if we can get if our development department do repossess a property, they give it to us and we get the money from the department to do it up. But at the end of the day, these are private properties, and private ownership in this country is very, very, very strong. You can't take that away from them.
Why not a vacant property tax then, Brendan? Like the introduction of a tax that would try to, and I'm sure there's lots of people who will hate me asking this, but there's a lot of people asking this on the thread as well, of why not have a vacant property tax?
Well, there is one. There are vacant levies there.
But the higher one, I think, is the general theme here that seems to be asked.
Yeah, like the prize at the end of the day, Hazel, is to get the property back into use, and the focus has to be on that. Like, if you have property where it's caught up in bankruptcy, all kinds of issues, and they just don't have the capacity, adding another property tax on it is not going to make it happen. And in some of these cases, it may have some kind of an incentive. Might be like, you have large houses up in Mountjoy Square, South Circle Road, North Circle Road, are lying empty in some cases, but underutilised, and the owners simply just can't afford to do them up. They will be the really fine properties for people living right smack in the middle of the city centre. But it would take an incentive, some kind of incentive, and I know people don't like the word tax incentives to do that. So in my view, sometimes an incentive to get properties back in use would be a quicker way of putting another tax, and the people involved are probably taxed to the hilt anyhow. It's just another tax on top of that.
Well, this is what John O'Hara, our chief planner, was saying, that incentivizing someone to do it, or providing them with a relief or support to do it up and actually use it, is probably the better way forward, the more proactive approach. So that is something we need to look at. And how a lot of this conversation, I think people think, oh, this is just theoretical and ideas, but like, if we were to do that, what would you do next on that? Who should we be asking, and who should we be pushing?
I think we need to get somebody to have a look at this, the different options. You have the bigger buildings for the conservation issues and all that. Then you have all the properties over the shops right across from the civic offices here, where there might be conservation issues. It's more around, the cost of getting it right and fire safety and all that. We have to find some way where it is attractive enough for the owner to do it. And like a lot of those apartments over the shops on Norman Quay, right around the city, would be ideal accommodation for people that are homeless, for single people that are homeless. But in this country, a bit like the public procurement, we do go for a higher level all the time. And it's only right that we go for the highest possible level of standards. But it is very hard if you're going to do that and get then the owner to have enough money to do the job. We need to find some way around that. And that's something myself and John O'Hara are looking at. We are going to commission somebody to have a look at that. And even if we could get a few properties back on it, it'd make a difference, because there is a lot of property empty in the city, yes.
You're gonna love me then, because my motion that's standing at the moment in the council is about exactly that, and asking for a specific plan. So there you go. So good to know that you're happy to get involved in it. I have some questions which we will ask to then wrap up. So does Mr. Kenny have any view on the proposal? I've been asking other people's questions through this chat just so people know, and then there are some strays, and there's a lot actually of questions. So we won't get to everything. The ones that we don't get to, please email Lord Mayor at dublincity.ie, and we'll try to get them answered with Brendan for you. But I've tried to be fair and tried to take a question from at least everyone. Some people ask a few. So does Mr. Kenny have any view on the proposal in the current Land Development Agency bill to remove the reserved powers of councillors to decide on the disposal of council-owned lands? That was from Kieran.
I can't comment on the government are bringing in legislation to set up the Land Development Agency at the moment. I very much welcome that. I think it's something that's badly needed in the country, the Land Development Agency. We've already been talking to them about various possibilities in the city. It'll have a single focus. Its job will be simply to provide housing, and that'll help everything that we've been talking about here about homelessness and on that. And I think it should have as much freedom and flexibility as possible. But in relation to what conditions and what elements are put into it, that's a matter for government, that's a matter for the Dáil, and it's a matter for politicians to fight that out. I wouldn't comment on that. But I certainly would welcome the whole concept of the Land Development Agency, and I think it's going to be a good thing. But in relation to taking away powers, I don't like to see any powers being taken away from the local authority. But that's not a matter for me, it's not a matter for the local authority, it's a matter for government to do that.
Oh, as a member of the local authority, I would say our powers have been dissolved more than anything else in the last 2 decades. So I would very much not like to see any of it being further dissolved. If anything, it'd be better to have more powers to try to bring in checks and balances. So other questions. Can I ask Brendan what his opinion is on the raising the height level on new housing developments in the city above current limits without venturing as far as high-rise towers?
The high-rise issue, Hazel, is a difficult one. Like, if we want to get housing in the city, we've got to get higher density. I think for developers to make property viable, they have to get as much as possible out of it. And it is the law of the land at the moment that you have to, if you're complying with national government regulations, you have to get the maximum density out of it. But I can understand the concerns about it. I think if you look at, say, and we spoke about area Oscar Traynor Road and Santry and other suburbs around the city, like we have mainly 2-story houses, and all of a sudden people are seeing a new development, high rise, high density going up beside them, and they're worried about it. We just haven't got over this culture of 2-story housing in this country. That's what people want. But the reality is there's no option, there's no alternative in Dublin. If people want to be housed, if people want to live within the Dublin city area, it has to be higher, and it has to be higher density. It just has to.
I also think there has to be a certain height, maybe not too high, but certain height. But there is a whole element of co-housing that we can bring in, like some European countries. Not co-living, folks. I have very specific thoughts about co-living, which I do not approve of. Basically, co-living, but co-housing is about community. It's about different people sharing a communal space and facilities, and might be something I'll be asking yourself again soon, Brendan. But I'm going to ask 3 more questions since we only have 5 minutes. We actually have lots of questions, but I picked these three out. I'm a single parent with 2 children, a 17-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. My son's mother tragically passed away 5 years ago. He lives with his grandmother until his secondary school is finished, which is June. He wants to live with me after. I earn over the threshold for the housing list, but that doesn't mean I can afford €2,000 a month for rent and bills. Why is there no options for people in my situation?
Yes, I would have every sympathy with somebody like that. The social housing provision at the moment has, an income limit of 35,000 and 50,000 then for more than one income. And the reality is there's very little available for people in between. Now, I know the Rebuilding Ireland Home Loan was to cater to a certain extent for that, and plans around affordable purchase and cost rental. But the reality is, for people within that income bracket, it is hugely difficult at the moment. If you increase the income limit for social housing, you'll just add thousands of more people to the waiting list. But there is certainly a gap there. I'd like to think that proposals around cost rental, we really need to get moving on that. That is the solution to housing, I think, going forward.
I was about to say in Mark's case here, I won't say his surname, but in Mark's case here, the cost rental model will help him significantly because you're not paying €2,000 a month then, you're paying half of that. So, but one of the many things, I know St. Michael's estate will have cost rental on site. So, is that correct? Okay. So, and then two more. Hi, Brendan has recently said that DCC will run out of housing land by 2025. Is this not a huge concern for him? Should efforts be made to start acquiring significant amounts of sites from time?
It's a huge concern for me. Yes, absolutely. For somebody that's so long working in housing. And I think it's an issue that's not debated sufficiently amongst the politicians, amongst councillors. Like the reality is, once we have our pipeline, and we have a significant pipeline there, once that's gone, we'll have really no land left in our own ownership. So we won't be able to do the type of direct build, direct provision of housing that we used to do. Now, we do buy sites in the city, and we bought a site in Cabra recently, we bought a site in Traynor. But the sites are very, very scarce. And also, when we do go out and bid for sites, we can get outbid very quickly. So we're competing against developers and all of that. So this raises a big issue about Dublin. Like, does there need to be a housing strategy for the Dublin region? And when I say the Dublin region, I'm saying that like Kildare, Meath, Wicklow as well. And I think that's the way it has to go. I know politically that may not be very, very acceptable, but there would be opportunities for us to develop housing even though our land is gone, like acquisitions, turnkeys, leasing, joint ventures and all this kind of stuff. But the traditional way of Dublin City Council bidding local authority housing estates, we won't be able to do that after 25. And that's why I would be very much in favour of the Land Development Agency. But they're going to be able to get their hands on other land owned by other state agents, maybe land owned by the private sector. And we'll get social housing that way. But certainly for land to build on ourselves, 2025 or so, there won't be anything left.
Okay, last question from Paul. The Department of Housing reported only 17% of people who exited homelessness in 2020 entered social housing, with 77% entering the private market. Is this a supply issue or is it a lack of clear path into social housing from homelessness?
It's a supply issue. It's a supply issue. The biggest method of exits from homelessness in the last couple of years for families in particular is through HAP. And HAP, I know, is not a very popular kind of scheme, but the reality is it's made a hugely positive contribution to housing needs. So people have got homes. Okay, maybe there's the security, they don't have the same security and tenure in social housing. But without that HAP scheme, like we'll be an awful lot worse off. We just have to get more supply of social housing. Supply really is the issue. There is a pathway there, and I think that pathway is better than what it used to be, but there just isn't enough to go around.
Brendan, I think you and I disagree on HAP. I keep on thinking the amount we pay on HAP, we could be building more social housing and more public housing on it. But I know that's a different conversation. So
I agree with you, Hazel. Like obviously, before about it, like there's about €1 billion nationally being spent on HAP. But the reality is that doesn't stop. That doesn't mean there's less money available to build social housing. The reality is we need HAP there at the moment because that supply isn't there. I'd love to get to the situation and hopefully in a few years' time where we're spending an awful lot less on HAP and spending it all on social housing, but it just doesn't shift over just like that. Like some people argue, why are we spending money on HAP? If we stop spending money on HAP, then we've no exits at all for lots of people. It'll change in time, and I'd like to see it changing in time, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Brendan. Last question from me. What is your favorite food? Just to make it light.
Chinese, of course.
And that's for the audience, me, basically. Thanks. So, no, thank you, everyone. Next week, we have Richard Shakespeare to come talk to you all about the whitewater rafting and also Les Moore from Parks to talk about parks and how we've been maintaining things during the lockdown. Big thank you to Brendan. Him and his team, and this is the thing, I know we all care about housing and homelessness in the city, and I know we all want to make sure things get better quicker. So, but I have to say, like Brendan and his team work really hard. Sometimes the folks on the team get a lot of abuse because they get told that it's just their fault when really it's not. So I ask that people, if you are contacting the department, I know it will be desperate times when you're contacting, but just if people could be a little nicer, that would be great. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Brendan's team for everything, and to a big thank you to the audience as well. So see you next week. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.